As Nancy told you, I teach at this school amongst some others, and I want to give... Too loud. Yes, I speak loud. Okay, I want to say one thing. You know, I teach actually this semester at 4 schools, and I should say all of them are represented today. I have students from Oakton, of course. I teach at Harold Washington, where we have my good friend Paul O'Malley. He teaches there with me. I'm expecting some students to come, but don't hold your breath. And then I teach at Columbia College of Missouri, where I have one lady here, and I teach at Columbia College of Chicago downtown, of which we have 2 or 3 representatives as well. So it's nice to be represented here. Okay, now, what I'm going to do today is talk to you about a field of algae that I like to call environmental phycology. Let me get my this out. And, what is environmental phycology? And I'll show you. I got to get this up here. There we go. We should be in business right now. We go here. There. Now, okay. But first, it's the effects of algae in the environment. And what are algae? I'm going to tell you right now. Why environmental phycology? Because, I'll show you. Oops. There we go. Footwork here. Let me shut off the lights. I just thought with all this technology, I might as well make use of it. Okay. Phycology is the study of algae. Yes, that's the real name. As my students know, we use the word phyco, P-H-Y-C-O, in various organisms, such as lichens and other things that we're going to be talking about today. Phycology, of course, is the study of algae. Now, the next question is, what is algae? And we'll tell you right now. Algae consists of microscopic plant-like organisms and large seaweeds that serve as a food source for many aquatic animals, as well as supplying large amounts of oxygen to the planet's atmosphere. And I should say over here, they say 32,000 species are known. Chances are there's over 100,000 now, because they keep discovering new species which are similar to other species, okay? And we'll go into that too. We also have blue-green algae. And these are the things that some of you are familiar with, believe it or not, in health food stores. Did you ever hear of something called spirulina? Well, that's actually blue-green algae, and blue-green algae are a form of bacteria, okay? Now, where do algae fit in the scheme of classification? And I'll show you now. Okay, yeah, we have a lot of curtains today, folks. So, over here, this is the classification of all known organisms today. We have 6 kingdoms. We have we'll start with the plants, the animals. This is known as the archaebacteria, because these are bacteria that live in extreme environments, such as too hot, too cold, too much salt, too acid, too base. You find many of these in conditions where you couldn't live, such as the hot springs in Yellowstone Park. You see various colors along the geyser areas, and these are bacteria that grow in boiling water. We also have the normal bacteria, which are known as the eubacteria. These are the ones around in your mouths, all over the air, that you know, exist out here. We have also the fungal kingdom. And by the way, you know, this deals with mushrooms and stuff like this. I should point out that sometimes, I don't know if you notice or not, but a lot of people say, Dave, I've been called a fungus. You know why? Because everybody says, gee, Dave, you're a real fun guy. Anyway, and then we have the protists. This is the group where the algae belong to today, okay? Now, this is called the kingdom Protista. This is a very important group. Many years ago, before they decided to put these single-celled organisms, and by the way, seaweeds belong in this group too, and the protists include a lot of things you're familiar with. They include little amoebas. These are these little jello-like things crawling around. They include the malaria parasite called the Plasmodium. They include a lot of flagellates, a lot of things that you find in water, a lot of disease-causing organisms, but the majority are good, okay, for the planet. This particular one is called a Paramecium. And as you see, just by sheer coincidence, this comes from the book we're using. Notice you see these little green things floating around this single-celled organism. Well, what do you think they are? Those are actually algae living inside the Paramecium, okay? Just thought I'd let you know, and we're going to see more pictures of that in a few moments. And here's another way of looking at the whole six kingdom scheme that we have. And by the way, I would bet that within 10 years from now, there will be more kingdoms because they're going to divide up the protists. The protists now are generally a mishmash, which means a whole conglomerate of various organisms, and many of them look totally different and behave totally different. And of course, the algae is one of them. And there's even one group of algae that I'm going to talk to you, at least one group that's considered algae, that might be changed altogether. And we'll go into that in a few minutes. So again, here we see fungi, animals, protists, plants, bacteria, and archaea. The archaea are the bacteria which have a different structure than the normal bacteria that you're familiar with, okay? And these, like I say, these are called extremophiles because they live in very extreme conditions that humans cannot tolerate. Okay, now here's a whole picture of a group of algae that you see, and I'm going to group these for you now, show you the various types. And then I'm going to go into why these are extremely important, the benefits of algae, as well as the bad aspects of algae. Unfortunately, there are some bad aspects, and I brought some books here to show you some of the bad, as well as the good, that I'll talk to you about later as well. Okay, these are the types of algae. The phycologists, the people who divide algae up into various groups, put them in these categories. You can call these phylum if you want, or divisions. It doesn't matter what you call them. These are just the various groups. And I'm going to show you pictures of all these. The first group we have is the Cyanochlorantha. That's the name. That's the technical name for the blue-green algae. We have the green algae called the Chlorophycophoida. Notice we have the word phyco in many of these. Phyta has nothing to do with Mike Tyson or people like him. It has to do with plants, just so you know. Then we have the Charophyta. Okay, phyta again means plants. We have the Euglena phyta, or the Euglena phycophyta, which literally means euglenoid algae-like plants. And you'll see why these are so interesting, and I'll show you in a few minutes. Many of these are fantastic. Here we see the Phaeophyta. These are the brown seaweeds. And I should point out that these are big. And by the way, when you go outside, starting now, you will all see weeds. Okay. Then we have the Chrysler These are the yellow-green algae. There are many groups of these. One of the most important and perhaps the most abundant on the whole planet are something called diatoms, which I'm sure you've heard of, and we'll go into that too. And then we have one of the most interesting and fascinating groups called the Pyrophycophoida, or the Dinoflagellates. Pyro means fire. So this literally means fire algae plant. Why are they called fire? Because you ever hear of the red tides? And if you're out off the coast of Florida certain times of the year, you'll see tremendous blooms of these things. So they're given the name Pyrophycophoida. Again, fire because they glow, and I have pictures of those too. And their other name, of course, is called the Dinoflagellates. As a matter of fact, these are perhaps the most toxic or poisonous algae in the oceans, and I'm going to talk about that today as well. I have pictures of all these folks, so you'll see what they look like. Then we have the Cryptophycophoida, also called cryptomonads. I hope you can see it. I put green because since they all are algae, which means they all contain chlorophyll, I put green in there. This is the smallest group known, the Cryptophycophoida. There's not too many species known. These are called monads, and you can recognize one if you deal with algae. Then you have the red algae, hence the term Rotophycophoida. Roto means red, so these are the seaweeds that you see out there in the ocean. Now, I want to point out about seaweeds real quick. Generally, there are three different layers of seaweeds. At the surface, we have the green, and then a little bit below that, we have the brown seaweeds, and then we have the red. And the reason for that is it has to do with the absorption of light. The color red is the quickest absorbed by the oceans, okay? And it follows the rainbow, like Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That's why when you see movies, underneath the ocean, it all appears blue, because that's where most the light that you see that goes the deepest. Okay. Now, here are pictures of the Cyanochlorantha. This one's real interesting. These are, again, bacteria-like organisms. And these are very important because those of you who like to eat, you know, the food, these organisms, some called nasta, actually fix the nitrogen, which which means they take the nitrogen out of the air and they convert it into a useful form of food that the plant needs, okay? So anyway, that's an example of the cyanochlorata, or the blue-green algae, which are actually bacteria. Okay, then we have the chlorophytophyta. This picture, I want to tell you, this picture is very dear to me for a simple reason. I took that one myself in Israel in 1970, okay? And in those days, we didn't have the fantastic equipment that we have now. This is a good example of a freshwater green algae. It's called Pediastrum. And if you notice, each triangle here, believe it or not, is one cell, okay? So they exist this way. You can't call this a colony. Well, I guess you can call it a colony, but you can't call it a multicellular organism because it just repeats itself. It looks like a star. And to take a picture like this, it's a lot different today. What you needed there, you needed 4 things. Now, my big thing was always taking pictures through the microscope using color slides. I think it was called Ektachrome or Kodachrome, one of them. I get mixed up. One is for prints and one is for slides. You needed a special type of film called tungsten filament. Why tungsten? Because that was for artificial light, which meant the light source that you have from the microscope, which means a little light bulb. Okay? And non-artificial light means the sun. Anyway, so you needed the special film, you needed the camera, you needed the microscope, and you needed the specimen. Okay? Now, the specimen is something that you need. As a matter of fact, someone once asked me, said, Dave, do you know what a specimen is? I says, yeah, it's an Italian spaceman. Okay, just thought I'd mention it. Okay, see you. Right, see you guys. Just thought. Okay, now, well, you know, you got to do. All right. All right. Then this one looks like a net. It's called Hyperdiction. Believe it or not, it's a green algae. Now, I want to show you something about the photography here. A few months ago, I bought myself the same type of microscope that they have in the other campus. And I photographed this myself, okay? And what you see here is the date, the time, and the name. I wrote that down, and this was the number 158 that I took with that. And then this, what's good about the microscopes today, you can measure. See, everything's in micrometers. And by the way, there's 1 million micrometers per meter. So if you look at this line, this will measure how many micrometers there are, you know. And then the scope we have is so fantastic that all you have to do is measure something called a distance line. And you can draw the line, let's say across here and here, and it'll tell you how big it is in micrometers. Isn't that something? So this technology is really mind-boggling. It just shows you what the human race can do when they put their mind to it. Okay. Here is another green algae. So far now, I'm still showing you pictures of the chlorophytophyta.
Yeah, on the previous slide, if it was a green algae, how come it wasn't green? Is that stained?
That's a good question, because it was stained. Yes, what bothered me, you made a good point. I want to point out something that bothers me. We have a whole bunch of slides upstairs, and they stain. You remember at the beginning, before I came, you saw a picture there? That was called microsterias. And they put those in pink and blue. They stained them. I mean, green was perfect, but they stain them. I don't know why they stain them. I prefer the right color, you understand? But they stain them so you can see it. Maybe the person who stained it thought you'd have a pink for the girl and blue for the boy. I don't know. But, you know. But anyway, yeah, so that's a good question, Paul. They stain these things, which some of these do not have to be stained because they're already colored and you can see them. Now, bacteria, you have to stain because you can't see them under the microscope unless you stain them. See? Okay, next. This is beautiful. This is called a desmid, and I know it doesn't mean anything, but each one of these are called semi-cells, and they're like 2 cells which make up one organism, hence the term semi. Here's the one that I showed you before. This is called microsterias, and the ones that I got from Ulston, other than this one, they were stained blue and pink. This one may have come from Harold Washington. We have a very nice lab prep guy there. His name is William Thompson, and he lends me slides and everything. So I get these and I take home and photograph them and then return them. Okay, here we see some also, these are also called the chlorophytophyta. This is seaweeds. This is called sea lettuce, by the way, called Ulva lactuca. And these you'll find in the marine environment. They grow very big. I have seen mats about 3 to 5 meters in diameter, not centimeters, meters. They grow on the surface in the marine environment. So again, these are considered algae, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes what the functions are, why they're so good. This is an example of the Chrysler Fighter. These are generally large. They look like little plants. But algae are not considered plants because they don't have, the seaweeds and these type of organisms are not considered plants because they don't have stems, leaves, or roots. Here we see the Euglena Fighter. I have 2 types here. This is called the Phacus, P-H-A-C-U-S, and this is a regular Euglena. And these things are interesting from 2 points of view. These are known as mixotrophs. Why? Because notice that they're green. The fact they're green means that they photosynthesize, but they also eat. Isn't that something? How can you photosynthesize and eat? Well, that's the way these organisms work. They eat and they photosynthesize. Do they do it at the same time? No. If this one, let's say, goes into a pipe or somehow the light, he goes into an area where there's no light, then he will change his form of nutrition to actually eating, because they actually have a gullet, something like a throat, and of course they'll eat living organisms, which will make them not only an autotroph, but a heterotroph like yourself. Everybody in this room is a heterotroph, okay? Which means you eat preformed organic material. I don't think anybody will eat a bowl of sodium sulfate for breakfast, which means that's inorganic, if you know what I mean. Okay. Now, here we see some brown seaweeds. These are called the Phaeophyta. That means the brown seaweeds. The most common one is kelp. And these are by far the largest in size because they can grow over 300 feet tall. Put another way, it's like a 30-story building. Isn't that something? So they can grow tall, and of course you find these off the coast of California. And these, of course, act as nursing beds and for sea urchins and things like this. And it's like the forests of the sea. Even though these are plants, well, they're algae, which means they all contain chlorophyll. Okay, next. Here's the Chrysophyta. These are by far the most abundant in the oceans, and you also find them on dry land in some places and in fresh water. These are diatoms. These are by far the most interesting and, when you look at them, the most beautiful. So this is a diatom. I'm going to show you some more pictures. This is a conglomerate of various diatoms. But in addition to diatoms, we have other types. This is a Sinura. This is not a diatom, but it belongs to the same group as the diatoms. Now, notice this word phytoplankton. I'm going to talk about this too. We have 2 types of planktonic organisms in any aquatic environment. You have the phytoplankton, which means plants. And what's plankton mean? Planktonic organisms are those that go with the flow, with the currents, you see? So those are planktonic. Phyto means plant, so we have little plants. We also have things called zooplankton. These are the little animals, or larvae of animals, which I'm going to show you too, which eat the phytoplankton. So, one very important aspect of the phytoplankton is that they maintain the life of the oceans, mainly fish, because the big fish eat the little fish eat the zooplankton, and the zooplankton eat the algae. So, in other words, they're all part of the food chain, similar as you are. You all eat plants. Even if you eat a cow, the cow eats the grain, shouldn't eat the grain, eats the grass, and then, it comes from the sun. So they all start with the food, with the plants. Okay, here we see a coccolithophorid. The White Cliffs of Dover, if you heard of them, they're over in England. They're composed of these, and this also belongs to the Chrysophycophyta. They're real interesting. This was taken, of course, with a scanning electron microscope. Look how beautiful it is, nice and round with all the different shapes. This is all one cell, by the way. They're quite interesting. Now, let me explain what diatoms are. This is by far one of the most important groups in the ocean because they feed a lot of animals. Okay, so over here, if you look, these are generally single-celled, and eukaryotic means they have a nucleus with a membrane, such as you. Everybody in this room is a eukaryote, okay? And then, the bacteria, by the way, are prokaryotes, which means they really don't have a nucleus surrounding their single chromosome. Anyway, these are divided up into two groups, centric, which means round, and pennate, which are boat-shaped. They meet nutritional needs through photosynthesis, and they have various pigments. We studied pigments today in class. In my biology class, the reason why they have different pigments is because, you know, you heard of chlorophyll, and the purpose of chlorophyll and the other pigments, such as butoxanthin and xanthophylls and carotene, which is stuff you find in carrot, is to transform the light energy into chemical energy. Now, what really makes the diatoms interesting is that they're encased in a transparent container called a frustule, which is like a petri dish, actually. Those of you who are familiar with petri dishes, you have one that fits over the other, and that's exactly the way the diatoms look. You have one frustule fits in the other. It's like a box with a cover. It's essentially a good way to mention those, or to describe those, and you can call those either a frustule or a valve. The valve is called a theca. A theca is a capsule, and we talk about thecas in algae. We'll show you when we get to the dinoflagellates next, you'll see what I mean. And the way to identify the different species of diatom is to look at the thecas, because they have beautiful holes and lines, and I have some pictures here that I'm going to show you, some others. Okay? Then many of these can form colonies. Now, remember in the beginning I said there's over 32,000 species generally? Well, now evidently there might be over 100,000 diatoms alone. So that means that they would increase now the average number of protists from 30,000 to over 100,000. Many of the books say there are only 30,000 protists, but that's probably way off now, and it'll probably be in the hundreds of thousands. That's just my opinion. All right, here we see some examples of dinoflagellates. This one in particular, I photographed myself when I was in Israel. I lived in Israel. I worked in a lab there from 1969 till 71. I photographed these. These are known as dinoflagellates. This is called Serratium hirundinella, Pediastrum westai. Now they changed the name to Pediastrum coutini, something like that. This one, I want to point out, this is these are freshwater dinoflagellates, by the way. This was from the Sea of Galilee, the same lake where a certain individual walked on the water, but I won't go into that. This one is the most interesting. Now, notice the name. Now, I don't know how this name got here. It's called Serratium arietinum. It has my last name. Now, I have no idea how that came about. You look it up on the internet, you'll see it. I was looking through some serratiums, some dinoflagellates, and I came across this. My name is rare. It's an Italian name, and it's Arieti. I'm not joking with you. This is called Serratium arietinum. I don't think it looks like me, but nevertheless, there are about 6 David Arietis. I looked it up. One's a golfer in Ireland. No kidding. Another one lives in Florida. He's in his 30s, so I actually called him up one day. Just, you know, I did. And his middle name is Paul, and my middle name is Franklin. Now, I don't know if that means anything, but in Hebrew, there is no F word. It's P. So, but anyway, so I was talking to him. You know, I said, hey, what the hell? Do you have the same name I do? Let me see. Maybe we're relatives. So he actually heard of my father, and he said his family was from northern Italy. And I said, well, that's where my family's from. So maybe we're relatives. But his name is really David P. Arietti, and I am David F. Arietti. The F, take your pick, either stands for Franklin or Fabulous, either one. Oh. So, and the golf player, I haven't gotten in contact with him yet, but he's in, I think he's Scottish or something, but that doesn't sound like a Scottish name. But really, so there are 6 of us in the world that I know of. Maybe there's some others in the middle of Africa somewhere. All right. Anyway, but isn't that strange? Now, I don't know how that came about, but it's spelled exactly like my last name. So maybe because I did work in Israel, some guy said, hey, let's name it after him. I don't know.
Could it be in the genes?
Maybe. But anyway, look it up on the internet. You'll see the name. I have no idea where that came from. All right. Now, here we see the dinoflagellates. This is the pictures I just showed you now. These are by far one of the most interesting organisms yet. Because, first of all, they're eukaryotic single cell. They all have 2 flagella. One's known as a transverse, which means from the side. Another one trailing, similar to a sperm cell, okay? So they have a trailing flagellum and a transverse. coming from the side. Now, they also, some of these have a theca, not all of them. Now, what really makes these fantastically different is that those of you who study biology, we study chromosomes. What do chromosomes look like? Well, chromosomes are DNA surrounded by histones. Histones are little proteins. The dinoflagellates do not have the histones, which means they're in a constant state where the chromosomes are condensed. The only time in biology where we see condensed chromosomes is when the cells are undergoing mitosis, which means cell division, you see? But here, the dinoflagellates are in a constant state of the chromosomes being condensed because they do not have these histones, which are like the spools of thread that wraps it around. So that's what makes them interesting. That's why I believe, I don't know, they might be put into another category, totally different, maybe another kingdom, because these are real interesting, and you'll find out why in a few minutes. Okay, now, many of them can migrate, you know, to protect themselves from UV light. That means light under 400 nanometers wavelength. Nearly half. Now, not all of the dinoflagellates are autotrophs, okay? Not all of them practice photosynthesis. Some are actually heterotrophs, and we're going to show you one found in the Neuse River in North Carolina that actually eats fish. What it means eats, of course, it makes sores. Not only do the fish have sores, but people have the sores, and we're going to talk about that too. So some of these are real bad, and we're going to find out. There's also a book written about them. I'll talk to you about that. And like I say, many species practice autotrophic, which means they photosynthesize. Others eat preformed organic material, such as proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, what other organisms are composed of. There's roughly 2,000 known species, and 60 of those 2,000, which means less than 1%, produce very bad poisons that I'm going to show you about too. That's what makes them so interesting. And dinoflagellates are a very successful group. And they also bloom. What is a bloom? A bloom is when they multiply like crazy. And someone asked me, why are dinoflagellates smarter than politicians in Washington? And the answer is because they can multiply without a calculator. Okay. Here we see a picture of a drawing of a dinoflagellate. Here you see this is the trailing flagellum, there's the transverse flagellum. And this one contains a theca, which is this capsule right there. See the theca covering? And there you can barely make out the flagellum, the whip-like structure. Oh, okay, now, here is the other type of organism, the cryptomonad, the Cryptophycopoda. I was talking to you about the dinoflagellate and the diatom. This is there's not too many of these around in the environment, just a few species, less than 100 known species of these. All right, now, here we see the red seaweeds, and it's red because it contains a pigment called phycoerythrin, and phycoerythrin masks the chlorophyll, you see. The chlorophyll, of course, this still contains chlorophyll, but it's masked by the phycoerythrin. Again, this is the deepest of the algae. Don't forget, it being somewhat like a plant, it still needs sun, so it's not going to be very deep down. I don't think farther than 100 meters down in the ocean because it needs some sunlight. Okay, that's why it's red to absorb the pigment. Okay, now let's look at the benefits of algae on the planet. Now that I've told you about the various types, first of all, the majority of, well, a great deal of our oxygen comes from algae, and then you see the equation of photosynthesis. The reason why I wrote it in green, because green is the color of chlorophyll, and I think of green as one of my favorite colors, green and blue. And here we see the usual photosynthetic formula, 6CO2 plus H2O gives you sugar and oxygen. And by the way, this is an estimate. They produce 300 million tons of oxygen a year, totally on the planet. That's why we have to be careful with poisons and stuff which go into the ocean, because we're going to suffocate ourselves if we get rid of the algae, okay? So that's the main thing they do. They also act as substrates. What's a substrate? A substrate is something where algae grow on, such as seaweeds. Seaweeds, I know, are plants, but other algae grow on the seaweeds as well. So they act as substrate. Nursing beds, as we saw in the seaweeds, the kelps. They act as nursing beds. Then, of course, this being a plant life, it absorbs carbon dioxide. That's why the scientists consider the ocean as a sink for carbon dioxide. What do we mean a sink? A sink is a place that gets rid of something. Okay, in this case, it gets rid of carbon dioxide. On the planet, the two major carbon dioxide sinks are the oceans and the rainforests. And unfortunately, I don't have to tell you what's happening with the rainforest. You know, they're cutting them down too, but we're trying to prevent that. And then we have some of these are called endosymbionts, which means they live within other organisms as well. As you're going to find out, I have pictures of that too. I'm going to show you where they live. They live in sponges and corals, and as I mentioned before, some of those Paramecium. Okay? So they do a tremendous amount of good for the planet, and also they're food for billions of organisms, not billions of species. Trillions and trillions of individuals that we're going to find out. So they have a very important role. Here we see algae in corals, okay? And they also live in sponges and lichens that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. These are the corals, you're all familiar. Corals are related to the jellyfish, okay? The same phylum, Cnidaria, but nevertheless, that's the group. Here we see the zooxanthellae. These are the names of the organisms that live in the corals, you see? And these are dinoflagellates, by the way, okay? They also live in flatworms, giant clams, and other organisms. This specific species is called Symbiodinium, okay? Notice the word SP is plural because there are many species. That's the way we write many species. Instead of writing SP, if we wrote SP, that would be one species. SPP means many, and that's what they look like. They're actually dinoflagellates, the ones I just spoke to you about. Over here we have a Paramecium. This is called Paramecium bursaria. Notice we have the zoochlorella here. You see it? By the way, what do you call two meciums walking down the street? The answer is a Paramecium. Just thought I'd mention that. Now, here we see sponges with algae in them. Yeah, these are sponges, and they have algae. Okay, here we see a this is an amoeba. And look what he's doing. He's eating something called a desmid. Boy, yummy, yummy, good for the tummy. Look at that. He's ready to gobble that one up. And by the way, you notice this one has already eaten algae because you see these things in the body here. Well, some of these are not only organelles, but it's probably an algae he just ate. You see? He's a hungry son of a gun. This one is. See? Nothing like them algae. Yes, sir. All right. Now, let's look at where else we find algae as a symbiont. We find them in lichens. Now what are lichens? My class knows. These are the things growing on trees in very air clean areas. What do I mean air clean? Because lichens are very sensitive to air pollution. Okay? So when you have lichens, that means the air is good. And you want these things to grow where you live because you don't want to live in an area that's contaminated. And lichens look like this. We have two parts, the fungal component called the mycobiont. A biont is something that lives on something. And the phycobiont, again, the word phyco means algae, the algae component. This is what they look like. You'll see things similar to this in this neck of the woods. In the tropics, you'll find more of these interesting, pretty ones. They're a mixture of fungi and algae. If you want to drive a real estate agent nuts, like I did one day, I was driving somewhere on Central Avenue near the Des Plaines campus, and I saw an open house. So I just went in there, and I thought I'd just talk for the hell of it. I wasn't really interested in buying a house. I mean, I'm not interested. I just wanted to see the reaction of the real estate agent who was there, and I really did. I asked her, I says, do you know what lichens are? She said, no. And I said, listen, you know, I do stuff like this, but, you know, I said, listen, I wouldn't want to buy this house because there are no lichens outside. What a lichen. And I told her, I said, look, if someone wants to buy a house, you want to make sure the air is clean, right? Therefore, you'd want lichens. You understand what I'm saying? Because they're very sensitive to air pollution. You want to live in an area that's clean, you understand? Air-wise. So, I don't know if she liked me or not at the end, but I just said, well, thank you, and I left, you know. But I do stuff like this because anybody who wants to buy a house, you want to make sure you have these there. I went up to Michigan and Wisconsin a number of years ago in the woods there, and you saw the trees were loaded with them. That meant the air is pretty good. In Chicago, you're not going to find any of these. However, I live in Skokie, actually a few blocks from here. We did have a tree and there were some lichens growing on it. As a matter of fact, I have it to show my class. So we did have some around here, okay? So that means the air isn't that bad. But they're very sensitive to air pollution. So I'm telling you now, if you want to buy a house, look for lichens. I'm serious. Don't tell the real estate agent, though. But ask her, what do we got, lichens in your house? All right. All right. Anyway, here we see a light photograph of algal cells and hyphae. Sounds like the city of Haifa in Israel. Fungal hyphae are the little strands. So these are lichens. So they. Now, let's talk about the food chain. How do algae fit in the food chain? Well, just by sheer coincidence, look what's there, a pediastra. Similar to the picture I showed. Now, we all know about food chains. You have producers, the primary producers, both on land and the water. Those are the plants and the plant-like organisms, called either phytoplankton or algae. See? Here we have plants, such as grasses and trees and leaves and things like this. Those, in turn, are eaten by the primary consumers, which, by the way, must all be herbivores because they eat plants. You understand? Okay? They eat plants. In fact, I once asked a guy, do you know what an herbivore is? He says, yeah, it's an animal that eats guys named Herb. Okay. Then we have a secondary consumer. That eats the primary consumer. These are all carnivores. And up the food chain, tertiary will eat a secondary, and quaternary will eat this. Now, many books just go up to the third. Humans and sharks and bears will be tertiary. But it doesn't matter, whether you go to 4 or 3, it's all the same. Notice that both of them begin with plants. See? You have plants and plants. Here's another picture, same thing, another example. This just goes up to tertiary. We have here the phytoplankton and the trees and leaves and stuff like this. Then we have the herbivores, followed by the secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Humans, even though they're vegetarians, they're still considered tertiary consumers because you're born that way. You understand? Just because you want a strict vegetarian diet doesn't mean you're still not a tertiary consumer because your body can handle meat. You understand? Okay? Even vegans who don't eat anything, eggs, honey, cheese, stuff like this, are still tertiary consumers. Now, so the algae feed the zooplankton. What exactly are zooplankton? Just so you know, these are all examples of zooplankton. Some are newly discovered organisms, such as this, that it's either a worm or some sort of coelenterate, something like a sea cucumber. A lot of these are worm-like, but these are also baby other organisms. The babies don't look anything like the adult, but these are the ones that eat the algae, and then the other fish or organisms eat them. Here we see the most abundant member of the zooplankton in the world. These are called copepods. This one's a male, this is a female. The females have the eggs on the outside like that. And you have trillions and trillions of these floating around. This is the most abundant animal on the earth. Yet I bet nobody in this room has ever seen them alive. That's because they're very small, although there are some parasitic ones that infect whales, and they can be over an inch. Anyway, so that's what these things are. These, again, the most abundant animal in the world. They're called copepods. For those of you who want to know how to spell it, it's C-O-P-E-P-O-D. That's C-O-P-E-P-O-D. And in order for them to grow like this is the adult. They go through various stages called copepodites. And they go through a number of stages before they look like the adult, which is this. You can actually see some of these with the naked eye. Now, here we see some copepods again. As I mentioned, algae is one of the prime food sources in the ocean. We see, this is called skeletonema. It's a diatom. Remember the one I mentioned here, you see copepods are actually eating skeletonema. And here I have some pictures of what skeletonema looks like. These again are the algae. Over here, we see some of the planktonic organisms. Do you see them? These are the ones that don't look like anything like the adults. Okay, here you see a crab zoe. There's a crab. It's called the zoea larvae. Doesn't look anything like the crab. Isn't that cool? Okay. In fact, one day, friend of mine wanted to go to this crab restaurant. So we go to a restaurant, we ask the head waiter, do you serve crabs here? He says, yeah, but only if they have the money. Okay, anyway. All right. Well, anyway, here we see a lobster. Look at that. Lobsters look somewhat like that. Here we see a barnacle larvae. The larvae doesn't look anything like the adult because the barnacles look like little volcanoes. And this one certainly doesn't, but he's going to settle down. Here you see a gastropod, which could be a snail or something like that. They don't look anything like the adult. These are the larvae. Here's a sea urchin. You know, sea urchins are generally round. So you see, here you see a sea star, which is like a starfish. Okay, so they don't look anything like the adults. A tunicate. This is actually one of your relatives. Believe it or not, you are a sow. A sow is a relative of ours because they're chordates. I'm not saying your Uncle Charlie is a sow for one of these, but you get the idea. These are the same phylum as we are. Okay, so notice it says planktonic larvae, and these eat the algae. Now, use for humans. How do we use this for humans? Well, take a look. First of all, we use algae as food, believe it or not, and many of you have eaten it without even knowing it. Those of you who like chocolate milk, yes. You'll see what I mean. Now, it acts like a food thickener. I'm going to show you carrageenan, where that comes from. Wraps and sushi. I don't know if you think you should eat sushi. You have raw fish. You may get some things called worms in there, which I don't think you'd like. I don't think the only thing they'll do is add to the flavor. Then you have gelatin-like agar used to raise bacteria. Then you have diatoms. I'm going to show you all these used to measure the resolution of microscopes. I'm going to show you one of them. And then we have the energy production. While I have this here, I'm going to show you a quick 2.5-minute movie on how algae is going to be used for energy. Now, I want to show you this because you're going to hear more about this. However, I want to point out the way they use this. I'll just give you a brief introduction. What they do is they raise the algae, and it has fats in it, better known as lipids. And what they want to do with those lipids is to burn them. You know, like they put them in cars with gasoline. Now that's no good. That literally burns me up. Why? Because you're still burning something. And what do you do when you burn? You're getting carbon dioxide. We don't need that. So I don't believe in using algae. There's only one source of energy that I think we should use, and we're all a result of that anyway, and that is solar. So you understand? By the way, is there enough light for you guys to write? No, there is a way how you can learn to read and write in the dark. You go to night school. I'm sure you can, right? All right. All right. Now, let's take a look at this. And, yeah, try it. Yeah. All right, now, cannot locate. Oh, I'll have to do this a different way. When in doubt, go to Plan B. Hold on, we got to go to Plan B here. Now, I wanted to show you this because this is a very good one. I'll have to, whoops. Hold on. This is a hassle sometimes. I meant to show you, it worked fine at home with me. Whoops. Okay. This, copy, let's see if we can do this. Copy. Now, I don't guarantee anything. I'm not connected. Here's what I'll do. I will get connected if this works. That's why we couldn't get it. Hold on. Connecting, and I didn't think of that. Connected. I may have to put in my password. And waiting. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to wait more than a minute. If it doesn't work, we'll just go on. We'll worry about that later. Okay, we'll worry about that later. There we go. I think we're on. Yep. Okay. Now we might be able to get on here. Hold on. Back here. Let's try this. Now, let's hope it works. I don't see why it shouldn't. We're on now. And yeah, so far so good. Oh, and going and yep. There we go. Okay.
The Kilowatt by P3 International is a simple household energy meter. Use it as a tool to measure how much...
All right, well, go on, okay, here, watch this.
We don't have a picture.
No picture, hold on.
We all need fuel to get around, and as America takes steps to improve our energy security, homegrown fuel sources are more important than ever. The Energy Department is researching one of the fuel sources of the future found here in algae. Have a look at this algae farm. These large man-made ponds are called raceways, and they cultivate a new crop of algae every few weeks. You see, algae, or more correctly, microalgae, are very small aquatic organisms that convert sunlight into energy. Some of these algae store energy in the form of natural oils. Under the right conditions, algae can make a lot of oil that can be converted into biofuels. Algae could potentially produce up to 60 times more oil per acre than land-based plants.
Hold on, guys, I got to
Extract that oil, and you have the raw materials to make fuel for cars, trucks, trains, and planes. In the future, anything that runs on gasoline and diesel could also use biofuel from algae.
Gotta go.
The oil is extracted by breaking down the
Well,
cell
we'll use
structure.
the other one, folks. I got
This
the
can
plan
be
B
done by
here.
using solvents or sound
Things
waves.
don't work the way we want them, so what we'll do is...
After the oil is extracted, then it is further processed at an integrated biorefinery, or in the future, at a traditional oil refinery. Another great benefit of algae? Consider this. Like plants, algae needs carbon dioxide to grow, and that's good for the environment since it takes CO2 out of the atmosphere, making it a nearly carbon-neutral fuel source. There may even be opportunities to build algae farms next to power plants that use fossil
There we
fuels,
go. Okay.
actually using CO2 exhaust to feed algae ponds. There are over 100,000 different strains of algae. Some grow better in different
There we go. We
climates,
got this.
or in freshwater, saltwater, or even wastewater. So, scientists are testing different algae under many different conditions to find the best strains and develop the most efficient farming practices. While commercial production is still a ways off, algae
We'll get it. Yeah, we got this one here. We've got to put this one in here. I don't know where it goes. Well, we almost had it, folks. There was a problem, but we'll go to Plan B. Anyway, all right, we'll get it before you leave. Let's continue where we left off. I have this. Okay, so here we have. It's also used in sewage treatment facilities. Before we leave, we'll get that working. There was a problem between that. Okay, now algae is currently used in many wastewater treatment facilities as well, and that reduces the need for more dangerous. Okay, it can capture also the runoff from fertilizers that enter lakes and streams from nearby farms, and algae is used in power plants to reduce CO2 emissions. The CO2 is pumped into a pond and where the algae feed. Maybe we can get the people upstairs. We'll give them a call. Yeah. All right, now, here we see Algae and Carrageenan. By the way, folks, I always have a backup. Right, that was good. Plan B. Okay. Notice food thickener is in chocolate milk, and here we see carrageenan right there. You see it on the label? That comes from that seaweed called Chondrus crispus. See it? Chondrus crispus. And so you see how it's used. That actually contains soy. Okay, here we see seaweed soup. This was taken at a restaurant called the Golden Watt. That's over by Jefferson Park on Central. They serve seaweed soup. It's a good place. That's the seaweed, the green stuff. So that's a real picture I took. Seaweed soup is good for you. It contains iodine. All right. Here we see sushi wrap coming from one of the seaweeds they use is called nori. See it there. And then we have agar, where you grow bacteria. That comes from Gelidium species right there. That's a red seaweed. Isn't that cool? You've all seen, those of you who work with microbiology, they raise bacteria, on agar plates. And they also use agar in food. Over here we see a diatom where they test the resolution of microscopes, especially light microscopes, where you count the number of dots, and that tells you the quality of the microscope. See? So that's another good one there. And then, so these are the general good aspects. Now we have the negative aspects. One is they become bioinvasive, which means They multiply like crazy and do some other things. Many contain very serious poisonous chemicals called toxins, and they cause diseases. Well, mainly due to the toxins. Here is one in particular that's a bioinvasive one found in New Zealand. It has the abbreviation, they call it Didimo, and it comes from Diatoms Are, and this is a diatom. And notice the way how pretty it looks individually, but it makes a gooey-looking mess over there. See, look, that's what it looks like when you see a lot of it, and this is in New Zealand. It causes nuisance growth in rivers and streams in New Zealand. So, look, it's a pretty one. See all these are called puncta, by the way, all the holes, and then this middle part is called the raphe. And if you see the way it looks, it's a real pretty organism. That was taken with a scanning electron microscope, by the way, not a light microscope. And then, over here, you see why these are called fire algae? Because the bloom, you see a bloom? These are dinoflagellates that bloom like this. And these will become quite toxic, actually, and I'll show you about the toxicity in a few moments. So, let's talk now about some of the toxicities of these things here. We have paralytic shellfish poisoning, that's something nice, and then amnesic shellfish poisoning caused by domoic acid, listeriosis, and harmful algal blooms, also known as HABs, for obvious reasons. Now, how would you all like to go to some party eating a lot of shellfish, and all of a sudden, after you eat, within a half hour, you find tingling in your mouth, okay? You know you're in deep trouble, okay? And this is one of the symptoms, and I'm going to show you this. Oh, yeah, good. Here, we'll play that one later. Oh, okay, hold on. I don't need it now, but thank you. Okay, so a lot of these produce toxins. Here's one, two, and I'm going to show you more. This one looks pretty cool, and this is another dinoflagellate. It is mainly the dinoflagellates that cause these, but others as well. Oh, good, because I want to show. Oh, okay. Here we have, this came from, I think this is from the state of Washington. Notice that now, if you have a bloom in some lake, you're going to have signs like this there. You see it? And these are real signs, and I'm going to go to one of these websites right now. I have that next to show you what that one's about. This one shows you about, this one in particular, is blue-green algae, which are also toxic that I'm going to mention. And notice it's written in Spanish as well. So do not swim or water ski in this lake. Do not drink the water. Keep pets and livestock away. Clean fish well and discard the guts. And avoid areas of scum when boating, okay? What do we mean by the scum? That's the white stuff floating on the water, okay? That scum is the algae. Okay, hold on. Okay, guys, we think we got it, so let's go back and we'll see if we'll get the algae as the energy. Very well, we got that working. We'll just try it and see. Here we go. There we go. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. Sound, I don't hear it. Yeah. No, we don't have it yet. Okay, let me go back to the other stuff. There's always something. That's Murphy's Law. Don't worry about it. We'll get it. All right, let's continue with this. Never quit, folks. If you quit, you never win. Remember, a winner never quits. Okay. So, let me show you this at least. Here is the web page from the state of Washington. And there we go. See? Okay. There you go. I see something. Now it should run. Try okay. Okay, hold on, guys. We gotta go to plan B again. Go back. I want to show you here. Open this up. Yeah, let's try it. That's the wrong one. Hold on. Go back to the other. Yeah, there we go. I don't hear any sound. Okay. Good. Well, all right. There we go, yeah. Let's go back. Okay, so anyway, you saw that from the blue-green. Now, let's, okay, we can't get there. Sometimes folks, things happen. So anyway, let's go back to this one. And this shows you the effects of a toxic blue-green algae. And you can see here, what is it? Blue-green algae are actually bacteria that have qualities similar to algae and other plants. These bacteria are cyanobacteria because cyan means blue-green, and they're commonly found in lakes and rivers, okay? And some of these are very poisonous. And I'm going to show you some of the toxins in a moment from those. Okay, so that's all you have to know about this. All right, then let's continue with my sheet here. Okay, next. Okay, now here we have this one called Pyrodinium bahamense. This one's a very bad one. This causes these problems, okay? Respiratory distress, eye irritation. This is what it looks like. Saxitoxin is produced by both of these, and that's quite a serious one. This is one of the 60 toxins that are produced. Now, here we have something about the hazardous algal blooms, and the climate is changing now, and this may help these blooms multiply, okay? And climate change can cause the severity of these, okay? So that was an example of a bloom I showed you, hazardous algal blooms, because they contain poisons. If they contain poisons and you eat it, it's no good. Here we see some pictures of the lifestyle of one of these in particular, called Alexandrium catanella, and this is the way they live. They first, they're resting as cysts, which are like a reproductive structure that will multiply or germinate when the environment allows them to, okay? So they're going to keep germinating, and then you're going to have billions and billions of these coming on out and causing a problem. And then, in particular, they will cause some problems. Here we see more dinoflagellates and, okay, let me go back to this one a minute. I'm going to show you. Here we see the Alexandrium again, similar to the one I just showed you. That's what they look like under the electron microscope. This is a light microscope, and again, we see saxitoxin again. The technical name is 11-hydroxysaxitoxin sulfate. So it's quite a brutal poison, okay? And it will kill you in a few minutes. Now, how will it kill you? Let me explain. Those of you who like to eat clams and oysters, it is not a good idea. Okay, because you can get diseases. One disease caused by saxitoxin is the one I mentioned previously called paralytic shellfish poisoning. Why do you get this? Okay, let's go back to where I left off. You have a tingling sensation. Then within a half hour, you're really in bad shape. You get distressed. You can't breathe. In other words, you're almost going to die, okay? And obviously, that's not a good thing. So, why do clams get it, and why don't these organisms affect the clam? Well, this is what a clam looks like. How do clams eat their food? Well, what happens is they have two siphons. An in-current siphon, where the food containing the goodies, which in this case is not only oxygen, but the Alexandrium catanella, and some other things, such as viruses and stuff, okay? So in theory, what happens is the water comes in, this filters out both the oxygen and the algae, and you have an X-current siphon over here where that stuff leaves. So what happens is the algae stay inside the clam, and the parts of the clam that most people eat are the muscle. It is the muscle that contains the poison of the toxins, okay? So you should be careful, okay? In fact, one day I went with a friend of mine to a restaurant, and we're looking on the menu, and, you know, he wanted to eat clams, and we see what they got. They have certain types of fish, and then we see catch of the day. So I asked the waitress, I say, hey, miss, what's the catch of the day? She says, today, it's a case of hepatitis. Okay. So you gotta be careful, at least she's honest. Okay, now, so here we see an actual photograph. of a, it's a real clam. What's going on with that? So these are the guts of a clam, and there's a drawing. So you got to be careful. It's not a good idea to eat these. Now, those of you who like oysters, you might as well call them Slurpees, because that's what you do, right? You put them in the sauce and you slurp them down. I mean, hey, you can do that with a, it's better to get a piece of bread, stick it in the sauce, and slurp that down. At least you don't have to worry about picking up some virus or some bacteria. All right, so, there we go. Now, how do they measure these toxins? We use a term which I'm sure you're not familiar with. It's called a mouse unit. Real unit. A mouse unit is the amount needed to cause the death of an 18 to 22 gram mouse, white mouse, in 15 minutes. Okay? The oral dose in humans for death is 1 to 4 milligrams, which means a milligram is 1,000th of a gram. So you need very little to kill you. So which is equivalent of 5,000 to 20,000 mouse units. Okay? So it's roughly, let's see, 1,250 mouse units is 1 milligram. You see? These are actual terminology, and I have information more on that. Okay. So anyway, of course, death depends on the physical condition of the patient, whether he's a kid or a grown man or one that weighs a lot. Okay? So we saw the problem there. Now, what about amnesic shellfish poisoning? This is caused by an organism called Pseudonychia. Pseudonychia is a diatom that we mentioned before, and they contain, oh, you couldn't get it? All right, just forget it. It contains a very bad substance, we'll try that again there, called domoic acid. There was something I read a while ago. There was a couple, they went to a restaurant, and they ordered whitefish. And when the guy was driving home, he didn't remember where he was going. Why? Can you imagine you go to a restaurant, then you drive home? He wasn't suffering a heart attack or something like that. He ate a whitefish that evidently ate some other organisms that contain domoic acid. This is very bad because that causes brain damage. So can you imagine, you go to a restaurant and then you forget where you're going. You forget lots of things. This is not made up. You can look at this up. I didn't make any of this up. So these are real serious issues that you should be aware of, okay? Then we have, how about this one, Anabena. This circulanaris is a blue-green algae, like a bacteria, and this, believe it or not, it contains something called anatoxin, which looks like this. Those of you who know chemistry, essentially these contain carbon and hydrogen there. This is a nitrogen and hydrogen and oxygen group with a carbon there, and this probably contains a carbon with 3 hydrogens. This is the way they draw these things to make it easy to see what they look like. This is a very severe neurotoxin, hence they call it the very fast death factor. And they don't call that just for the hell of it, because it's quite serious. Over here, of course, we see a light micrograph, the one on the top, and at the bottom is a scanning electron microscope micrograph. Okay, here we see another one. This one from Cylindros spermiopsis radiciborski. That's a nice name. That looks like that's also blue-green algae, I believe. I'm not sure. It causes kidney and liver damage. There's the structure of it. So I don't think you want to eat anything nearby that had this present. There's the structure. So some of these are quite bad. And then we have another one called Aphanizomenon. Now this one comes from an organism called Aphanizomenon. Looks like this, and produces a hepatic toxin, which means it's poisonous to the liver, and it produces microcystin. Microcystin also comes from an organism called microcystis. These are all blue-green algae. Look at that. Now this one is very bad. It'll affect the liver. Aphanizomenon has been known to kill animals too that drink in the water. And then why do we have so many of these? Because we put in garbage, well, nutrients, and then these things multiply because of the nutrients. Okay? And then this one is the one that I know a lot about because, first of all, it's in my book called The Earth is My Patient, Prognosis Disaster, and a fellow by the name of Rodney Barker wrote a book about an incident that occurred in the Neuse River. It has the biblical name, and the waters turned to blood. It's about this particular organism that I'm going to show you called Pfiesteria piscicida, okay? And these are the illnesses you can get from it, okay? And these are found in the Neuse River in North Carolina. Okay, this whole book is about the incident that happened to a woman named Gail Jorgensen in North Carolina. And she went with her family to the Neuse River, and then a lot of things happened. So they took a scientist by the name Joanne Burkholder, and she and her assistant got sick just by studying these organisms. You understand? Her assistant got brain damage and he forgot almost everything just by working with these things. So these are quite serious. In my book, The Earth is My Patient, I have a section there about these, and it's called the No Noose is Good News. You see, no Neuse River, and then yes, Noose is bad news. I actually have that here in the book as a heading when I speak about Pfisteriosis, okay? And so these are the things you get. You get sensitivity to light, weakness, vertigo, cough, shortness of breath, red eyes, tearing eyes. You know, I don't have to read all these. In other words, it's not too pleasant to be in contact with this, okay? So, this is what it looks like. According to the scientists, this particular, again, this is a dinoflagellate. That's why these things are so interesting. Think you got it? All right, we'll try it. We'll go back to the movie on algae in a moment. This is, again, scanning electron micrographs. Notice you see various different shapes of these things. According to the scientists, this goes through 23 different stages in its life cycle. So that's what makes it interesting. But let's take a look at see what it does. Some wise guys get here. No, you guys want to eat? They make sure no Pfiesteria here. This is evidently a place. I didn't make this up. Pretty cool. Anyway, you always get some people there who worry. That's right. You don't want to eat this stuff. Now, let's see what it does to fish. Pretty cool, huh? It causes these lesions on fish. Now, this is a real serious thing. Now, why does it happen in North Carolina? Very simple. This, again, has to do with humans. What do? Well, North Carolina is known for its pig farms, okay? They raise a lot of pigs. The waste goes into a lagoon. Sometimes the lagoons break. The waste in the lagoons go into the Neuse River. That's why I say no news is good news, right? What happens? These dinoflagellates, called Pfiesteria piscicida, love these things. Man, it's a gourmet restaurant for them. They'll gobble, gobble, multiply like crazy, and then they'll go into the Neuse River and cause these illnesses, not only to humans, but to the fish as well. You see it? So that's why you have to be careful with these things. Okay, so this is no joke, okay? I think that's the end of this. However, we got this working now. I spent all this time trying to show you this movie on algae as energy source, and you make up your own mind. It's only 2.5 minutes. Let's see if we get it. According to them, we got it. Let's check it. I never quit, folks. I want to show you something I showed. There it goes. Whatever they're advertising, I'm sure you're all going to run out and get it, right? Okay. Here, watch this. And I got some stuff here I want to show you. Yeah, this is cool. Thank you, Keith.
We all need fuel to get around, and as America takes steps to improve our energy security, homegrown fuel sources are more important than ever. The Energy Department is researching one of the fuel sources of the future found here in algae. Have a look at this algae farm. These large man-made ponds are called raceways, and they cultivate a new crop of algae every few weeks. You see, algae, or more correctly, microalgae, are very small aquatic organisms that convert sunlight into energy. Some of these algae store energy in the form of natural oils. Under the right conditions, algae can make a lot of oil that can be converted into biofuels. Algae could potentially produce up to 60 times more oil per acre than land-based plants. Extract that oil, and you have the raw materials to make fuel for cars, trucks, trains, and planes. In the future, anything that runs on gasoline and diesel could also use biofuel from algae. The oil is extracted by breaking down the cell structure of the algae. This can be done by using solvents or sound waves. After the oil is extracted, then it is further processed at an integrated biorefinery, or in the future, at a traditional oil refinery. Another great benefit of algae? Consider this. Like plants, algae needs carbon dioxide to grow, and that's good for the environment since it takes CO2 out of the atmosphere, making it a nearly carbon-neutral fuel source. There may even be opportunities to build algae farms next to power plants that use fossil fuels, actually using CO2 exhaust to feed algae ponds. There are over 100,000 different strains of algae. Some grow better in different climates, or in freshwater, saltwater, or even wastewater. So, scientists are testing different algae under many different conditions to find the best strains and develop the most efficient farming practices. While commercial production is still a ways off, algae holds great promise to become a reliable homegrown fuel source to reduce our nation's reliance on foreign oil.
Okay, so now we're almost done. So that's what I want to do. We'll get the lights, and oh, by the way, before we finish today, you see this young lady over here? She has some special good bottles to sell. Not bottles, these are cups, which are PBA free, which means you don't have to worry about getting cancer if you drink from them. Okay? It's a bisphenol A. They do not contain bisphenol A, which is a known carcinogen. Okay, now, can you hear me? Hello? Yes. Okay. I want to show you, I have a whole bunch of books here about some of these organisms. As I just mentioned to you, there's this one called And the Waters Turn to Blood. This was about the incident of the Neuse River. And it's real interesting. Let's see, this was written in 1997, okay? So, and the reason is because we have the pig waste. You see too much farms that raise the pigs, okay? And that's due to human overpopulation. And, you know, people want to eat because they want pigs, because pigs are meat, and it's cheap to grow pigs, and you get the idea. So that's one. Two, when I was in graduate school, I heard about this book. This book was written in 1921. So fortunately, thanks to the internet, I'm able to get any book I want, including the older ones. Now, I only paid $35 for it. As you can see, the shape isn't that great, but who cares? I wanted it. This is one of the books I was always looking for over 30 years. Until somebody in the library here, thanks to Tricia, she said, why don't you look it up on the internet? Because it didn't occur to me. And yes, within a half hour I found it, and I ordered it, and got it a couple days later. So, this one, the title of it is The Free-Living Unarmored Dinoflagellata, which means the dinoflagellates. Now, there are two types generally, armored and unarmored. The armored contain a theca, that's that capsule. The unarmored do not. And they describe them here, most of it's words with a few pictures. See, like this, but then they have a bunch of colored plates in the back, see? That's really why I bought the book, because I wanted the colored pictures. And they show you, these are the ones without the theca. It was written by two people called Charles Atwood Kofoid and Olive Sweezy. The only Olive I ever knew was Popeye's girlfriend. Okay, anyway, and, but anyway, so, but here you see, okay, so this book, so this shows you the unarmored dinoflagellate. I collect the whole book, especially in my field. There's another one that I use for this to get the species of algae. I used to belong to the American Phycological Society, and I used to go to meetings. I met these two authors, Harold Bold and Michael J. Winey. They wrote a book called Introduction to the Algae. This came out, I think, in the 70s. I think it's 75 or something. Like I say, I used to belong to the organization. 78 it came out. And so, you know, I met these people. And then, this one is one of 3 volumes. And when I was in graduate school, I always wanted to get it, but I couldn't find it because it was put out by the government. Again, on the internet. I have now, this comes in 3 volumes. I have all 3. And I just decided to look it up a few weeks ago, so I got it, all 3. I had another issue. I had the volume 1 that I bought a few years ago because they were only selling them separately. That was the one I wanted, which happens to be this one. And this one, the reason why I brought this was, let me show you. This is called, the whole volume, this is volume 1 of 3, Poisonous and venomous marine animals. And in that, they mentioned the dinoflagellates. You see it? The ones I spoke about, the ones that cause many of these illnesses. So here they have drawings of them, and then they have light micrographs. There are no electron micrographs in this book. Even though I think the electron microscope was in existence in the 70s, they didn't use them for this book, okay? Here you see the drawings, and they show, you mentioned some of the toxins and things of both the armored and unarmored. So this is a very good book. Like I say, the 3 volumes, each one's this thick. And there's a lot of pictures, that's what I'm saying. It's not all print. See, they use colored pictures. These are the poisonous clams and stuff like that, see? Cool book. One of my favorite books. Here we see octopus, a whole bunch of stuff. Here we see worms. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Here you see some effects on the hands of humans. So some of these are real brutal. I think what's caused this? Bloodworms. Yeah, he was attacked by a bloodworm, a bite from a bloodworm, Chrysler Fighter. So some of the marine organisms are quite toxic. So I also have my business cards. Not that I'm looking for business, but if anybody wants some business cards, you can come and get them. And okay, are there any other questions? None? Zero? Zilch? Yes.
I was wondering why wouldn't that plant, or did they have to stir up the...
Oh, they stir the algae to keep it moving, I guess. It's a good question because it probably grows better because it may stick. You want to keep them moving because don't forget it, maybe it has to do with the fact that, like, in theory, the ones that they grow are planktonic, so they have to pretend that they're moving. You understand?
Does it have to do anything with, like, them being exposed to CO2 or not really?
Well, they want to make sure. Don't forget, it's outside. So, okay, you asked a very good question. What I believe is the case in that, if they let the algae sit there, it's going to float to the top, which means the algae below that won't get the sunlight because you see how dense it is? That's the point. I think they want to mix it slowly so all of it will become, will be exposed to the sun. You see?
I think a lot of the algae farms go to...
Yes, exactly, and that's what I say too. When they mix it with cars, you got to burn the oil. That's the problem. They do have these. You see, let me tell you something. The American media, I'm just going to tell you this right now, they are dumbing you down because they're making you believe, let's say by ethanol. Hey, if we use ethanol, that will be great. We get, we're not going to depend on foreign countries for oil. But the point is, you're still burning the stuff, you see? That's the point. That's why I told you, you know, it burns me up because we don't want to burn anything. We have enough carbon dioxide. Yeah, they're going to tell you it's carbon neutral, right? I think he said that. It's carbon neutral, which means they're going to absorb the carbon dioxide. But at the rate we're spewing out the carbon dioxide, you can bet it's not going to absorb the amount we spew out. You see the point? See, they want you to think these things. That's why the media doesn't tell you the truth. We got to get away from everything except solar, because if the sun goes, we all go. You see the point? You understand the point? Of course, wind is good, so is geothermal. But, you know, that's where you get the heat from the ground, which is fine. Dams are absolute no-no, no matter what they tell you, because you have to do a lot of damage to get the dams. You got to flood the land, and if you live like in China by the Yangtze River, you're going to be removed from your home. They're going to move you somewhere else, whether you want to go or not. You know, you don't exactly have a say in that. You know? Anyway, so the only energy source is solar. So you see how everything in the whole world boils down to energy. That's the biggest problem we have. We got to get rid of carbon-based fuels and go solar strictly. And I bet you we'll have some solar cars in the next 10 years. Technology is going to start booming. Because look now, we have the electric car, you have the Leaf, you have the Tesla, you have others, you know. We're getting there, it's just slowly. It's too slow for me. We should have done it 20 years ago, or in 1973, when guess what happened there? The oil embargo. We haven't learned the damn thing from them. You understand? That's when Nixon was president. We're still, in fact, the cars aren't doing much better than they did back in 73. You know that, right? Yes, you wanted to say.
Two questions.
Yeah.
One, piggybacking on what you're talking about, and one is clarification.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Why not wind?
Yeah, because if you see the windmills, they don't exactly beautify the land. You see? We have plenty of windmills, especially out in the west. Texas has them. And Nebraska, I think there might be some in Illinois, but first of all, they uglify the landscape. They're real tremendous things, they are, and they kill birds and things like this. That's the problem with the wind. Now, to have a few is okay. Actually, the best place to put the windmills are offshore. You always have wind, and I've seen them in Holland, and I think there's some in Denmark, you understand? But it's a good question with the wind, but don't forget, you need to build these monstrous things, and you just can't have wind. In order to get them, you gotta have infrastructure, which means you gotta chop up the land, put the tubes, you gotta put the wires in, you understand? They have to go, the wires have to go somewhere. Look at the pictures of wind farms, you'll see them. You have hundreds of them, but they do uglify, if I can use that word, the area, yeah.
Now, the other question was just a clarification. Did I understand you to say that all seaweed is algae?
Yes. Well, no. Well, it depends. I guess for the most part, yes. All the seaweeds are considered protists.
So
and they're
agar is as well.
What is?
Agar.
Oh, agar. Yeah, agar. It comes from the species Gelidium. Gelidium is a red seaweed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so all the seaweeds are algae or protists, okay? Now, maybe they'll change the name. Wait, let me get one thing. If you talk to a zoologist, he'll consider seaweeds plants. In some schemes, they consider the seaweeds plants. So, you know, like I say, classification is always changing, because they also change the name of the genus and species of many of these, yeah.
Well, what you just said ties in with my question, because I seem to remember from my long ago biology class in high school that algae were considered plants.
Yes.
And they also had classes of protists that were a much smaller sounding group of microorganisms.
Right.
And then they had Monarans,
Right.
which I haven't heard about for ages.
Yeah, the Monera was the old name for bacteria. Now they divided up the bacteria into the two. They call it the eubacteria
Oh.
and the archaeobacteria.
Okay, so those are...
Yes, yeah, the Monera was the old one. And speaking of the old ways, amoebas were called animals. There are only two kingdoms, animal and plants. Fungus were considered plants. But now, they're totally different. Even though they're similar, they lack chlorophyll and they have chitin in their cell wall, which is similar to that, by the way. The substance in fungus is similar to what's in arthropods, such as insects. They also contain chitin. Isn't that interesting? I tell you, classification's always changing. See, when we went to high school, they were only plant and animals. But now, by the way, the protists used to be called protozoa, remember?
Yeah.
Which means before animals, literally. So they keep changing. Who knows, in 10 years? That's why I think the Dinoflagellates are going to be put in a whole new group. Because the fact their nucleus, their chromosomes are different. Everyone else has histones, not to be confused with her stones. But anyway, these are little proteins. I think Paul knows what I'm talking about, right? Okay, are there any questions? Answer or forever. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants some mugs, go get them. Of course, you all have one anyway in your face, but that's a different. Okay. Any other? Yes, sir.
How soon can we expect to be able to have algae commercially?
That's a good question. Well, you know, there's going to be a lot of problems with it. I have no idea. I hope never, to be honest with you. Now they use it for food, but not for energy. That's just my opinion. Now remember, I'm very opinionated, because if you burn something, you don't want to use it. So it's a good question. Depends what the politicians think. By the way, there is one issue now with the politicians, has to do with Obama and the Keystone Pipeline. You heard of that? He has the say whether to approve it or not. The pipeline is going to originate from Canada all the way to Texas. Now, they're postponing his decision. He's the one that can make it or break it. He's postponing it for political reasons until after the 2014 elections. Because he's postponing it because if he thinks he's going to have it now, he's going to lose. If he agrees to it, he's going to tick off a lot of people, including myself. If he waits, he's going to see what he's playing political games. You know, politicians need guts, you know. And if I were a politician, I would say, hey, absolutely not. We do not need it. Because that's going to be oil, and what do we do with the oil, whether we use it or send it abroad? It's got to be burnt. When we burn it, more CO2. What's the biggest problem now in the world? Too much CO2 and global warming. You see it? And that's where I'm coming from. And I'm a fanatic about this, but hey, I got nothing to gain except the life for the future of the planet. You understand? That's all I care about. Nothing else. Okay. Do I have any other questions? Feel free to answer. You can always call me, contact me, email me, everything, right? Okay, well then, and by the way, if anyone's interested, I'm going to give a 4 o'clock lecture about my books over at the other campus today. And I'll be here at 8 o'clock. Thank you.